Welcome to a special program to celebrate Alaska Book Week 2024, organized by Trish Jenkins on Alaska literary giant and former writer laureate John Haines. I'm Heather Lendy, the current writer laureate, coming to you from Tlingit Ani in Deschutes, or Haines, Alaska, which is no relation to John, but that's a whole other story. Also today we have UAA English professor Toby Whitcomb and Lila Vogt representing the Alaska Center for the Book, and Rachel Epstein, author of May the Owl Call Again, a return to poet John Mead Haines, 1924 to 2011, an intimate correspondence of words, writings, and letters with reflections on life, death, and friendship. When Haines died in 2011, writer Dan O'Neill, read Dan's books if you haven't, told the Fairbanks Daily News Miner that he was, quote, the best poet, writer, and author Alaska has ever produced, unquote. The paper also reported that in Haines' final hours, an old friend read to him from the poet's first and critically acclaimed book, Winter News. It's a lovely image. And then his friend sums up Haines for the obituary this way. He was, quote, a cantankerous, insufferable, unbendable old bastard, but he was a damn good writer. He's Alaska's best writer, he said. Rachel Epstein became Haines' close friend and champion in the final years of his life and has a very different perspective. Their unusual friendship developed through the exchange of letters, both lofty and ordinary. She says that their stars crossed for 2 years, and his laughter and curious intellect are gifts he left her. And the John Haines others knew in different settings was unfamiliar to her. But first, the basics on John Haines. In 1947, after serving in the Navy during World War II and attending art school, Haines bought a 160-acre homestead claim in Richardson, about 80 miles from Fairbanks. His paints froze, so he wrote poetry. His Alaska life was never linear. There was much toing and froing between here and the lower 48 and beyond. And in 1948, he returned to Washington, D.C., where he'd gone to high school. His father was a career naval officer, and enrolled in American University, took more art classes, worked as a Navy draftsman, went to New York City and studied art and made art with some of the great modern painters. There's a timely essay about sleeping on the street in Rachel's book in New York City when he was literally a starving artist. He returned to the homestead from 1954 to 1969, was appointed the Poet Laureate of Alaska in 1969. That's since been changed to the Writer Laureate. Taught graduate level and honors English classes at the University of Alaska Fairbanks, and was a writer in residence at a half a dozen colleges before returning to Fairbanks, where he died. Haines wrote a dozen books of poems, essays, and memoirs, was a fellow of the Academy of American Poetry, the 2007 USA Rasmussen Fellow from the United States Artists, a 2008 Aiken Taylor Award for Modern American Poetry was also given to him. He had 2 Guggenheim Fellowships and a National Endowment for the Arts Fellowship, and he was the 2005 Rasmussen Foundation Distinguished Artist. At Richardson, he built a 12 by 16-foot cabin from timber salvaged off an unused railroad bridge, according to the New York Times obituary, that also observes that his, quote, experience hunting, trapping, and surviving as a homesteader in the Alaska wilderness fueled his outpouring of haunting poetry of endless cold nights, howling wolves, and deep primitive dreams. Author Rachel Epstein was the special events coordinator at the University of Alaska campus bookstore from 1999 to 2020. In 2012, she received a Contributions to Literacy in Alaska Award, and in 2020, the Alaska Governor's Award for Distinguished Service to the Humanities, and in 2023, the University of Alaska Meritorious Award. And Toby, will you begin by reading us a couple of John's poems and telling us a bit about his literary legacy or place in the Alaska canon, and begin this discussion? And then we'll hear from Lila, and Rachel can talk about her relationship. This is all going to be pretty informal, so feel free to jump in and we can kind of all moderate ourselves. And I hope it's going to be a very informative hour. Toby?
Thank you, Heather. Yes, let me introduce myself just a little bit because I'm probably unknown to most of the people watching this. So I've been at the University of Alaska Anchorage for 32 years. It feels like a summer afternoon, but it's been 32 years. Before that, I'm in the Department of English, and my specializations are American literature, utopianism, Tolkien, textual studies, critical theory, poetry. I'm sort of the last of the generalists, it seems to me, which is a real pleasure. Before I came to UAA, I was over on New York, on New York's Long Island for 3 years, and that was not a very pleasant experience for me. Before that, I got degrees at the University of California, Irvine. So I was there for a few years, 5, 6 years. And then I was at UCSB, University of California, Santa Barbara, for about 6. So that's my briefest of CVs. When it comes to talking about John Haines, I thought what might be most helpful is if I maybe start with a poem, and then I backfill with the traditions from which Haines obviously comes, and then finish with another poem, if that sounds good. So let me start with a poem which is just called Poem, and it's actually in Rachel's book, and it's on page 30 of Rachel's book. I'm just going to start with this, and then I will move on to the background and then another poem. So this is a poem, page 30. The immense sadness of approaching winter hangs in the air this cloudy September. Today, a muddy road filled with leaves. Tomorrow, the stiffening earth and a footprint glazed in ice. The sun breaking through, still warm, but the road deep in shadow. Your hand in mine is cold. Our berries picked, the mushrooms gathered. Each of us hides in his heart a small piece of this summer, as mice store their roots in a place known only to them. We believe in a life to come when the stark tree stands in silence above the blackened leaf. But now, at a bend in the road, to stop and listen. Strange song of a southbound bird overflows in the quiet dusk from the top of that tree. That is just absolutely gorgeous. So the background of this, there are two traditions to think about, the British tradition and the American tradition. As far as nature poetry is concerned, the British tradition really starts with Keats and with, not Coleridge so much as Wordsworth. I'd say Keats and Wordsworth. Keats's To Autumn is very, very Haines-esque, or maybe Haines-esque is Haines is Keats-esque, I'm not sure which it would be. So I'd add to that tradition the 20th century poet Ted Hughes, who was a fine poet and the husband at one point of Sylvia Plath, as many of you probably know. So that's maybe something about the English tradition. The American tradition that Haines draws from is very much Emerson and Thoreau, with another piece that's actually in there. And the other piece is not poetry, but it's prose. And when I think of Haines, I think of naturalism, which is a literary movement, includes Crane and Stephen Crane, Theodore Dreiser, and Frank Norris. So that's very much the tradition that he comes from. Let me read another poem of his, which is actually my favorite poem of his, and it is, in fact, in also Rachel's book. I'm just going to find it. If the Owl Calls Again. This is extraordinary, and I'll maybe talk a little bit once I've read this about why this is so extraordinary, as that first poem that I read is also remarkable. If the Owl Calls Again is the title of it, and it just simply runs into the first line. If the owl calls again at dusk from the island in the river, and it's not too cold, I'll wait for the moon to rise, then take wing and glide to meet him. We will not speak, but put it against the frost, soar above the alder flats, searching with tawny eyes, and then we'll sit in the shadowy spruce and pick the bones of careless mice, while the long moon drifts toward Asia and the river mutters in its icy bed. And when the morning climbs, the limbs will part without a sound, fulfilled, floating homeward as the cold world awakens. Again, I think that's lovely. And when I think of Haines, and I think of Tom Sexton, another great Alaskan poet, in the same way, they are minute observers of nature. But if you think about the English tradition, you think about Ted Hughes for a moment, who was really very well known in the last part of the 20th century. Ted Hughes, bless him, is all about Ted Hughes. He's showing off, and he has a very vicious view of nature, and that is actually not at all the view that John Haines has. So there is a deep understanding of nature. There's an extraordinary clarity in what he sees, and he's not seeing nature as anything other than a part of the existence which includes human beings. Now, earlier, I said that he had a connection to the naturalist movement. And I'm just going to go ahead and read a very short quotation from Stephen Crane, because I think it shows you the connection between Haines and his poetry and his extraordinarily detailed love of nature and the naturalist movement. Stephen Crane, most famous for the Red Badge of Courage. The quote I'm going to give you in just a moment is actually from The Blue Hotel, which is a short story that takes place in the middle of a winter in Nebraska. So this is the quote from Stephen Crane's short story. And as I'm saying, I think it echoes very much the kinds of things that John Haines, all the way up close to Fairbanks, would have experienced again and again on his homestead after his paints froze and he had to start writing instead, which is a wonderful story. So here's the quote from Stephen Crane. The he with which the quote begins is a Swede, S-W-E-D-E, a Swede who finds himself in a Nebraska snowstorm. He might have been in a deserted village. We picture the world as thick with conquering and elate humanity. But here, with the bugles of the tempest pealing, it was hard to imagine a peopled earth. One viewed the existence of man then as a marvel and conceded a glamour of wonder to these lice, which were caused to cling to a whirling, fire-smoked, ice-locked, disease-stricken, space-lost bulb. The conceit of man was explained by this storm to be the very engine of life. One was a coxcomb not to die in it. However, the Swede found a sword. So that's my contribution. I think, Lila, you're next, right?
Okay. My name is Lila Vogt. I'm on the board of the Alaska Center for the Book, where I have been for 30 plus years. And I grew up in Fairbanks. I'm a lifelong Alaskan, and my family had a cabin on the Salter River where we put in at Richardson there, right close to John's cabin, homestead. And as a young person growing up, I grew up hunting, and so I have a really strong sense of landscape and connection to the land. And John and I shared that same ecosystem, if you will. And when I first became aware of him as a young adult, I was a little resentful of his connection to a place that I considered mine, if you will. But I grew to love his connection to the landscape and to the Alaskan experience, both with animals and the natural world. And I wanted to read a little piece of his from an essay of, actually it's an introduction to The Stars, the Snow, the Fire, 25 Years in the Alaska Wilderness, a memoir by John Haines. And this is, if you will, I was walking home from Redmond Creek one morning late in January. On a divide between two watersheds, I came upon the scene of a battle between a moose and 3 wolves. The story was written plainly in the snow at my feet. The wolves had come in from the west, following an old trail from the Salcha River, and found the moose feeding in an open stretch of the overgrown road I was walking. The sign was fresh. It must have happened the night before. The snow was torn up with chunks of frozen moss and broken sticks scattered about here and there, swatches of moose hair, a confusion of tracks in the trampled snow. The splayed, stabbing feet of the moose, the big furred pads and spread toenails of the wolves. I walked on watching the snow. The moose was large and alone, almost certainly a bull. In one place, he backed himself into a low brush-hung bank to protect his rear. The wolves moved away from him. Those moose feet are dangerous. The moose turned, ran on for 50 yards, and the fight began again. It became a running, broken fight that went on for nearly half a mile in the changing, rutted terrain, the red morning light coming across the hills from the sun low in the south. A pattern shifting and uncertain. The wolves relenting, running out into the brush in a wide circle and closing again. Another patch of moose hair in the trodden snow. I felt that I knew those wolves. I had seen their tracks several times before during that winter, and once they had taken a marten from one of my traps. I believed them to be a female and 2 nearly grown pups. If I was right, she may have been teaching them how to hunt, and all that turmoil in the snow may have been the serious play of things that must kill to live. But I saw no blood sign that morning, and the moose seemed to have gotten the better of the fight. At the end of it, he plunged away into thick alder brush. I saw his tracks moving more slowly now as he climbed through a low saddle, going north in the shallow, unbroken snow. The 3 wolves trotted east toward Banner Creek. What might have been a silence, an unwritten page, an absence, spoke to me as clearly as if I had been there to see it. I have imagined a man who might live as the coldest scholar on earth, who followed each clue in the snow, writing a book as he went. It would be the history of snow, the book of winter, a 1,000-year text to be read by a people hunting these hills in a distant time. Who is here and who has gone? What were their names? What did they kill and eat? Whom did they leave behind? And I think this illustrates John's extreme attention to the natural world that he lived in and how he tied together the aspects of the natural world with the human world. And I think he started out with writing essays, but as he got more and more into poetry, and again, this is his early work when he was in Alaska, so he broadened his view, and as he got into poetry more and more, I think his worldview is brought into that. Anyway, I was fortunate to become friends with John later in his life and actually had some correspondence with him. And I, like Rachel, found him to be endearing and not nearly as curmudgeonly as he is often presented to be. So I have, I think, most of his books, and I just really admire his work, and he is a legacy to the Alaskan literary canon. That's my contribution.
Thank you, Lila. And now Rachel, the author whose book we're spotlighting here, along with the work of the late great John Haines.
I'm
So
gonna show you the book, okay? This is my book.
yes, please do.
You
And
see?
go ahead and take it away, Rachel.
So I when I met John Haines, he was coming to Anchorage to the UAA campus bookstore for the Alaska Laureate panel, and I picked him up at the airport. I do not usually pick up guest speakers at the airport, but this was no big deal, and it became a big deal to him. And this has stayed with me my whole life. How such something so small, picking someone up at the airport, could make such a difference to someone's life for a long time. You know, the fact that I picked him up at the airport. So he was someone that we just hit it off. You know, and we're talking about things, not poetry, not Alaska, but how to do about history. And I have a BA in history, in European history. And but it was, and when he asked me about my family, I mean, I just, you know, he asked me about me. And it was so easy to talk to him. Like I could talk to him about anything. It was unexpected, not planned. And at the Bridal Laureate event, he was brilliant. And I had that event recorded, and it is with Richard Downhour, Anne Henley, Nancy Lord were also there on the panel, and Kathleen Tarr was the moderator, and you know, asking questions, and in it, he really shared his experiences, his life with this audience, many students, and everyone was in awe of him because of his voice. He was a great orator, and but more than anything else is that he's, for me, oh, you know, I knew him 2 years, only 2 years. He's a very honest person, and you didn't have to agree with him, but he said something. He had something to say. It wasn't just about his life and what he did at Richardson and me. He really had something to say, and he was open to, I say, anyone to just listen. And he was remarkable in that way. I, you know, through our correspondence, we started writing letters, and they're funny. I mean, he was really funny. And it was like talking about whatever's on your mind, basically. And I had there are a lot of things that I've left unanswered in terms of study, like in terms of European history, but also just about in literature. There's some questions about, you know, putting these great artists on pedestals, these great writers, however, their political stance could be questionable or even horrible in terms of freedom and democracy that I've been brought up with. It's part of me. And he was quite vocal. He had his conscience. He had a conscience that went beyond Alaska or his own little world. And he wrote letters to the editor. He, you know, about a lot of different things. But when what really meant a lot to him, again, he's in his 80s. He's thinking a lot about, like, he loved the Spanish poets. The Spanish poets. You know, these are the people that influenced him. And it was the character of the miners at Richardson in that area, their character. It wasn't just hunting. It wasn't just, you know, survival. It had to do with character. You talk about virtues. And he was a great friend. I mean, I don't know. I don't have this type of relationship with other people. Also, except when I was in high school, maybe sometimes after college, I write letters. I'm not a letter writer per se. This was something that was just, it was the right way for me to express myself by writing letters or finding a card and sending him a letter, and also to be in the present. And I didn't want my relationship with him to be the great poet or the writer of Winter News. I wanted there to be something of the present right now. And that was not hard to do because he would tell me stories. He would talk. I'd ask him lots of questions about things, what he thought. And I think that this act of thinking about something or studying something is important. And it's not John, it's not about a gender, women think, you know what, women think, some men think, I could say, but just to wonder, there's no right or wrong or things that affect you. And it was, from the letters you can see, there's a lot in our correspondence. There's a lot. And there's a lot of Rachel in the correspondence. And even though my letters are not there because I didn't say them, you can understand kind of when he's responding to something, he mentions in reference to something I said, he'll respond to that. And I just think it's sad that people do not read his work. Much of his work is out of print, or else it seems it's another generation, and maybe it's not around the corner, that will have fresh eyes to read his poetry, his prose, ask themselves questions. What did he mean by this? Put it with others. There are a lot of people in American poetic tradition, put him with Robinson Jeffers. So there's a lot of contrasting him with Edward Albee, but Robinson Jeffers is really, I found that a lot, people talking about him in context with Robinson, in contrast to Robinson Jeffers. So I do not think he was a pretentious person. A lot of people say we were intimidated by him, about his, he was so great, his brilliance. That isn't the John Haines I knew. He was very down to earth. In my book, and I mentioned when we were at the airport, I picked him up 3 times. 3 times he was in Anchorage. The woman mentioned her father liked poetry. He stopped immediately and he gives her his CD of poets, of his poetry, and she's elated. He would talk poetry to anybody. He was, it was part of him. What the other thing I have to say is, he did not speak poorly of other writers. He didn't talk poorly of people in terms of to me, or I never heard him say about their character. He didn't like what people were writing. He was very, he criticized modern poetry. He criticized people. I think it's the lack of study of poetry to understand the poetic tradition, a literary tradition. I think he was frustrated that there's no foundation a foundation to read, let's say, Alaskan writers. I don't see it. I've done many events at the bookstore. I met people, had a wonderful time meeting so many authors. To this day, I cannot say there's a foundation to teach on, to build on, that would have Alaska literature. You can find things in anthologies. It's more linear, in timeline of people wrote this or this one wrote that. I don't really understand it. I don't understand why people aren't reading or questioning what he poses. Now, Toby, you mentioned writers before him. He talks a lot about writers before him that influenced him. And oh, excuse me. Let me get some water for a minute. At the Alaska laureate event, he talked about Lebo. Well, a lot of this had kind of a Zen quality to some of the poems. But we had an event with the Confucius Institute with Summer Hugh, and she used Lebo and took his writings in Chinese, and I had an English translation. I had John Haines in Chinese that was from Pangalone House Press in Taiwan. That actually translated John Haines in Chinese and English, and to compare it. And basically, she said he stole all the stuff from Lebo. I mean, you can see how, just stole the images, certain words to steal it. We say influence, and it was so funny. It was fascinating. So no one is completely, independent of influence. Nobody is. And so there are many influences in John Haines' writing. And I just say that that's for everybody. So if someone thinks this is it's unique or curious, yes, it can be expressive in a different way, but a lot of it has been said before in some fashion. So, thank you. So I think that's something else I've learned through John Haines also. And he gives credit to everybody. He is not someone who says I. He's not an ego-driven person. So that's just something I just throw that out right now, kind of spontaneously. I don't know if there's would you like me saying more about the book? The reason for the book is I had these letters, these dear letters, and I would read them. And in 2016, my mother went to assisted living, so she wasn't doing well. And I started reading these letters. They happened to be the same age. Anyway, I thought, oh, I'm going to ruin these letters, so I keep opening them. So I decided to transcribe them. So I transcribed them. So that's how I had them in another format, the letters. My mom passed away in 2017. So I put them away, the letters. And then it was in 2008. No, I mean, later on, I started seeing what people were writing about John Haines, and it disturbed me. And I just thought people don't know him, like they don't know him or have a full view of him. And I thought, wow, I have this. I have the Bridal Laureate, so it's his words. These are his letters, and they're his poems that he shared. These are his ideas, and it's the end of his life. And this is what's important to him. So I thought that was a good reason to put it together, more like a compilation. And Sandy Clevin came to me and she wanted to publish this. She heard I had these letters. And she said she could get funding for it to have it done. Long story short, okay. But I think from the beginning, we were on a different wavelength because Sandy thought this is something about letters. And he sent me these funny cat cards, very humorous cat cards. He's very humorous in his letters, which I have transcribed. And it was joyous. And it was kind of this brilliant man. He's so funny, he's so down to earth. And I didn't see it that way. I saw I'm pretty serious. And I just saw that here he is, that so many people attribute coming to Alaska because of Winter News or studying literature outside. Say it was John Haines who influenced me. I became a teacher or a poet. So many people have come across this. And here he was alone, extremely lonely, and wanting, I think, just to have a conversation with somebody. And I just happened to be that person, it just happened to be that person to give him that attention. And I'd say 99% of what has been written about him, and also essays about him, to put him in this like nature writer and all these many things I found disturbing, and that they're so limited. He had this great attention to life. And when his experiences in World War II, this attention, and he talks about attention to like surviving World War II and a bombardment, but also that the mental, intellectual attention that's needed in terms of scholarship. And he equates the two. And that's, to me, it's amazing. That's in my book, in his essay that he talks about. So I just find simple things about John Haines, about attention, definitely about changes happening to Alaska, the political nature, the institutional, relationships, if you want to say corporatism, that you can go off on all these other things. But he found time to write about 9/11. He found time to talk about seriously what's being taught, and laptops, the laptops, how that is getting away from students' attention. So, and I just think on so many levels, there's so much of John Haines people can relate to. It doesn't have to be difficult to read his poetry, can be. And by doing this book, someone said, you need an introduction to the poems. You need to explain this. You need to do this. You need to do that. So I didn't want to create John Haines, this new John Haines. So I tried to do it the best I could, to have these little introductions to his poems, to be, concise. And a lot of it is, I think, through writing and poetry. Not only is it a literary tradition that's continued in certain ways from influences on the author, that we share, but it's sharing it with that reader. It's that other person who's reading it that something can be understood. You don't have to agree with anything, but just to be understood. And that we share this life, this existence, this precious life with each other. Pay attention to that. And there are too many labels out there. He wasn't someone who, when I got this award or that award, and I'm so smart. I don't, the way, I think I don't know, I don't really understand it. His life in Fairbanks, I don't really want to understand it because it's gone, it's past, there's no point in, you know, going there. But he, for me, he was someone I could, was open to talking to anybody. He was very observant. And I think that within himself gave him a really rich life, really rich life. The only other thing I want to say, I'm going on tangent though, is that I have in the book also his essay, and he sent it to me, called On the Street. And it's about being in New York and when he went to art school. And I absolutely love this. And I love it because it's so realistic about he's living in this apartment full of bugs, vermin. He's getting bitten. I mean, this is New York City. If you have ever lived in New York City, you know, there are so many, there are a lot of rats around, mice. You used to look at them in the subway, but you know, it's roaches. There's so many things, okay, in New York. He's writing about this, and he's, you know, and Franz Klein, who is this, I don't know if you know, in the art world, he's like a genius artist of expressionism, but he did the big black splashes, okay, just blacks. So he was one of his friends. She said get out of there, you have to leave, you have to, you know, you have to move, John, move, you know, he's saying to him, John, move, you have to move where you're living. And he ended up moving in with two other women who, and they became his wife. I mean, that was Peggy and then Joe. So it's just so realistic. And part of me, this is my opinion, is that living in Fairbanks and homesteading and that survival, that closeness to nature was a lot easier than living in New York City. It's just a lot easier I mean, he's living in a place with lots of immigrants, you know, you have horses. I mean, they still had horses in the street, you know, and you had all this you know, great artists that were experimenting. But John, to me, he's not experimenting. He's not someone who's experimenting with language. He's kind of preserving, you know, these literary traditions. So I just love that story that he did. He sent it to me, and that's in his book Descent, which is his last book of essays. And I absolutely, I don't know anybody who ever described New York like that. Not, you know, his theme is something else, but this is main, you know, existence in New York. So that's my take on how John Haines really got to Alaska. So anyway, please say something. I mean, I just wanted to throw that out.
I have a question for you, Rachel, because and the book again is called May the Owl Call Again, right? And it's a May from the title of If the Owl Calls Again. You're hoping that he does, obviously, and we hear John Haines, right? And the structure of the book, as you mentioned, the opening is you pretty much transcribe that poet laureate panel, and then you go back and forth to the letters. How did you decide what correspondence to put in, which ones maybe were too private, or, you know, how did you edit it and then add, you know, which poems where? It's really, I think, reading it, what I was struck by is how concise it is, how well structured it is, how enlightening it is on all fronts, from his voice, old and young, your relationship, the friendship, the poetry, the art, the history. And it's just really, really tightly crafted. And I think a lot of credit goes to you as a writer and editor, because this could have been a big mess of John Haines, and it isn't. It's really a fabulous little book, and on lots of different levels. And so I just want to know how you went about that. Did you have advice? Did you have readers? Did you just do it? What was the process?
Well, again, my attempt, it's very naive. Okay, I've never written a book. I never wanted to write a book. So the idea was, okay, how did I meet John Haines? So it starts with an email, right? Because he's going to come to the Alaska. So I just wanted it to be like, kind of, this is how it happened. And there is a chronology. Like, we have an email, I'm going to think of it, and then this happened. And I thought people would experience John Haines, and they wouldn't do it filtered through me. They would do it through his words, writings, and letters. So they would really be able to grasp John Haines. And of course, it's my John Haines because it's our interaction. So that was what was in mind. When I started it, it looked a lot different than it looks now. And for the writer laureate, I had a lot about the other writer laureates. I had a whole chapter about Weimar. You know, he sent me this, you know, because I thought, oh, this is so interesting. Look, you can see the women, the photos of the women in Weimar. They're so modern, and then what happens later on? Weimar, you know, is at the turn of the century, and then you come to fascist Germany. But it was the visual. John Haines loved the visual. You know, he studied photography, and oh, I'll put that in, and I'll put this chapter in, and then the obituaries. I'll have all the whole obituary, right, from the New York Times, the whole obituary here. There was about from the Guardian about that he sent me. Oh, I'll put the whole thing in, right? I didn't want to edit anything. And then it came like, first it was too expensive to have the obituaries, all these things printed, but also he was like, no, you know, why are you putting that here? So I've had a few people comment on the order of things. And Mike Burwell, it was in October 2022, he helped, like there was like the chronology. I had the chronology up front, like before the letters, the chronology of letters. And he said, you know, put it in the back. So that went to the back. So he was very helpful in getting some of the order in like the table of contents. That was one example. There was a thing like the acknowledgements. I was going to put the acknowledgements at the front of the book, and that went in the back of the book. So that was like struggle things. But basically, I worked really hard on this book. This book, it wasn't something like, oh, I'm just writing this, transcribing this, and that's it. I worked really hard. And what I mean by hard is I thought about it. I thought about it a lot. Now, in terms of the letters, most of the letters are there. Certain cards are the cards. They were either too silly, or there was one, okay, there is a cat standing up and like a conductor, and it says, you know, you deserve an ovation. You know, he was giving me, he was too generous towards me, and I was embarrassed to write things like that, where he really, I think I have enough of how much these letters meant to him, and our correspondence meant. He was very open about that. So I didn't want more of that. There were certain things I didn't want more of that. There was a few, there was like, he sent me a card of George O'Keeffe. It was George, I don't have that, you know. Some of it was like that. The things that to discuss, there were certain things that were, for me, too personal about my life. I didn't want included there. There were things that were just too silly. I mean, I had that limerick, the limerick that's in there. I really wondered, should I put this limerick in there? Well, he sent me the limerick, and it was, you know, okay, kind of, you know, but no, that's John Haines. He sent me that. So I didn't edit that out. I don't feel that I distorted our relationship or him as a person. I mean, I don't think I really left out. So I don't think it was really like editing it was such a big deal. Where there are the ellipses, it could have mentioned somebody. It could have said something that was just not contributing, you know, like personal in a way, like silly, you know, just not useful in any way, or interesting in a way. I don't know. I just, it wasn't so difficult to edit it. if you see the chronology of the letters, you see, you know, I wrote down whenever I received something, so you can see, oh, this was not there, that wasn't included. There isn't much that's left out, is what I'd say. I thought, oh, the cards. I think, okay, we're going to put all the cards in, you know, and get permission and have all the picture of the cards, you know, the nice cards. But even Gond art, I got to have Gond artist from India. So I sent him this card that's black paper that you use a gel to write on, and it's a leaf. And I really like Gond art. He did too. It was just a new thing. It was just like, hey, what do you think of this? So we actually had an event at the bookstore, but from the book Night Life of Trees from Tara Press in India. And they actually sent their prints, and we had an exhibit at the bookstore, an art exhibit, and I ended up buying 2 of these prints, and my friend Carol bought another 2, so we made it worthwhile. They were expensive, but this thing of Gond art. So I thought, oh, I'm going to have this in it, but then to get permission, it was going to be $200 at least to have it in the book, and I just didn't have budget for anything. So there were things I took out. I took out a lot of things that was just long, you know, like the order of it. Someone said you need an introduction. A lot of that being told this needs to be clarified, or who is this? When it came to the other literary figures, the writers, I decided to put down their dates, just so someone who doesn't have any background could think, see, John Haines didn't Okay, he didn't just go to art school, come to Bridgerton, and a part of us put the mind off and just live out in wild, and survive, and the rest of him just doesn't exist. That's not, and then he goes off in the world and writes poetry. That's just not the story. It's a romantic story, but no, he had a lot from his background he took with him. He thinks, he's a thinker. He did say all the work at Richardson. He said this, it took so much work, he didn't have time to read. He didn't have time, the time that came in the winter, in different, where he had time to study things. So I think I can say in my life, just how I am. I was going to University of California, Santa Cruz. I was a history major, and I left, and I moved to the Bronx for a short time, very short time, and then ended up in Hoboken, New Jersey. But when I was in New York and I was working in bookstores, I didn't have money, really didn't have money. I had enough money to like $1 a day. So I either would go to breakfast, which would cost 90 cents to get like coffee, eggs, and toast, or I could walk and put like 50 blocks to work. So that was my choice. What am I going to do? I was very happy. And I was happy to get out of, idyllic Santa Cruz. And I wasn't reading. I wasn't doing any of that. I was just taking it all in. And, I used to sing. I used to get up and I'd be singing in the street, like walking to work. And it's like, I know Alaska because I lived there like 30 years, it was like a gift to be there. It's never left me. It was just a gift. You didn't have to do anything. It's just there. New York is not like that. It's not just there, but that sense of excitement, of newness, and you're not thinking about it. You're not planning something. You're not protecting yourself. You're just doing it. You're living. And that's what I feel, I think John Haines, that was what it was for him for Alaska, but that doesn't mean he turned off his brain. He doesn't mean he stopped reading. It doesn't mean he stopped thinking. Different times in your life, you do different things. So in that case, in my big ego, I would say I relate to him that way. He didn't have the structure, academic, degrees. He didn't stay in school. And the other thing is, there is a thing that he wanted to paint. His paint froze, so he did poetry. That's not 100%. I'm sure he said that. I'm not questioning that. But it was that he couldn't do it. He wanted to paint this place, and he went, and I found he said that in an essay. He wasn't able to do it. But he wanted, poetry is many things to different people. And it is in the moment, and it can be your experience, and it's a lot of things. But also, again, I go back, the Spanish poets, the Spanish Revolution, this had such great meaning to him. And also he translated poets when he was younger. He translated, Miguel Hernandez. And in Miguel Hernandez's fairly new book of his bilingual collection, they have John Haines' translation in it. So, and it's a love poem. So John Haines is complex. He's complex. He touches a lot of things. And the best thing you can do, if you pick up some John Haines, and if you like something, just pick up, try it. And let yourself tell you if it resonates, if there's some truth to that, truth. And I think from the beginning of the book, I want to say I have this poem from I don't know, In the Forest Without Leaves. And it's so beautiful, how, the forest makes space for death. And it's very beautiful, and at the end, I had the poem, Meditation on a Skull Carved in Crystal. It's death. And it's like, if you think about dying, not in a morbid way or anything, this all goes away. You're dead, you're not here. This all goes away. Well, sorry, Toby, but everything you do in school, getting you a good grade, or what I mean? That really, it all goes away when you're done. Now, it's important when you're alive to achieve and to learn things and think and see new things and the newness. Be curious in this life. That's really important. I'm not, but basically, it's all going away. And what's left? And to me, what was left was the heart. You have your senses, the mind, but it's the heart. And that's a choice people have. It's a choice how you live in this world. It's a choice who you relate to. It's a choice what you want to feel. Really, it is a choice. And that goes back to people, how you read John Haines, and also what you share, if you even talk about him. This is the 100th anniversary of his birth, right? He would be 100 years old. And my hope would that people would read John Haines or talk about him. That's it, that'd be wonderful. And And you don't have to all agree. You don't have to, just don't have to agree. The other thing I just like to, and then in the book in the back, they have online, you can hear John Haines recite his poetry. It's from Elliston Digital Archive, and also from San Francisco State University from 1965, I think 69. And they're fantastic. It's free, it's online, and you can hear him, unedited. And he's funny too, is but serious. He's a very serious, man. And everything he does, he's quite serious. And that's, I don't know if I answered your question. I kind of go on. I don't know. We're good on time. I don't know what else to say. Buy the book. Oh, one thing I want to say, Sir Chris,
I see you thinking deeply. Do you have a question or a comment for Rachel?
So I just wanted to pick up on some of the things that Rachel said, because she's spot on about Haines and the implicit criticism of publishing, which means that somebody as great as Haines and somebody as great as Tom Sexton gets nary a nod from the publishing world. And there's a reason for that. And the reason is that the publishing world is controlled by the East Coast of this country. And it is because that's where the people are. That's where the publishing houses are. And Alaska's rather far away from the East Coast. So I thought that was well put. I think, too, that Haines is absolutely right about the problems of modern poetry. A lot of modern poets are unnecessarily clever and unnecessarily obscure. A lot of them have no sense of a tradition. And so what we get is people showing off to make their egos feel better. The classic example of that, in my opinion, is Ted Hughes, a great poet who was ruined because he fell in love with himself. And here you have Haines, a great poet who was not ruined because his love affair was not with himself, but it was with nature. Same thing for Thoreau, same thing for Emerson, same thing for Tom Sexton.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Tom Sexton is not widely, I don't know people talking about Tom Sexton or reading, hey, I just read this poem,
No, they
don't
don't.
know if, but I don't know, just for Alaska, the thing that I came to Alaska in 94. And what really, I met Brian in 94, so we've been together, but so that's a big deal. But the other thing is stories. People had these stories, amazing stories and experiences. And it's just like, it was just so many different people, and you didn't know who they didn't need to have credentials to say something. You listen, you make your mind up what you think. And I hope those days aren't gone. That's all, I don't think they're gone. I think there are younger people out there, and I think they're wide-eyed, and it's their turn. You know what I mean? It's like their turn to see what they do with that place. And wherever you are, where you are, nature is everywhere. It isn't just in Alaska. What I want to say one thing just about, I live in San Manuel, Arizona, which is it's 40 miles from Tucson. It's north of the Biosphere 2, and 10 miles from Oracle. That's kind of where I am. It's 3,500 people, and my relationship to the nature here is so different than anywhere I've ever lived. What goes on, the clouds, the clouds mean water, life, the lightning, or the saguaro, the healthy saguaro wild. And I've never seen that any other area in Arizona like it is here. And people here, again, have stories. There are these stories, and you have many generations who live here. So it's just being in place, kind of, it takes work sometimes to be in a place. Patience if you want to be there. And I think being in Alaska, if you stay in Alaska, you take some patience. You can be a visitor and just come and go and experience and go, I got fishing, I went to this. But if you stay, and there's so much to learn from people in Alaska, and there's few people out there who criticize John Haines for being like the white colonialist who homesteaded the land, and he doesn't talk about Alaska Native people. He's not, he's indifferent. That's not John Haines I knew, and it's not what he wrote in letters. I think he was very much part of the European tradition. He wasn't going away from the European tradition. He was trying to craft something within the European American literary tradition. And I think he succeeded. And I just hope people, pay attention to his work, not create a myth of John Haines, the myth of this man who comes homestead, this life he had, and like as a mythic person. To me, I don't look at him as a mythic person. I also don't look at life as a journey. His journey, he might talk about myth and a journey in his life, and those are his words, but those aren't my words, and I appreciate John Haines' work. So I'm saying is you can also get a lot from his work, even if you don't agree with some things he presents. That's just the way I approach things. I do not find him a male voice, you hunting all I don't find that at all, even though a lot of his poems or early poems have to do with difficult relationships with women. Let's say that minor, like okay, but I don't find that. I don't read his poetry like this is the male voice. And some other poets are very differently part of the genre, gender. Women also, they're it's very strongly within a gender. So that is something else to consider because I know we all do. I think, this is a man. You label people, when you're going to read, or their age. We all do that. We categorize things a lot. So like that. I want to say something about Cirque Press, and that is, it took a long time, to get this book published, and it wasn't easy, but Sandy's the one who wanted to have the book published. She's the one who came to me to publish it. And there are people who gave money to have it printed, supported it. And Mike Burwell, he spent a lot of time editing it. And again, his contributions made the book much better. But at the end of the day, my name's on the book and John Haines' name is on the book. And when it created a certain tension within myself, knowing that if this goes out, his name, his name's on it. It has to be the best it possibly can be. And it was hard. I mean, it's hard. And on me, I wanted it out by 2024 because of the 100th anniversary of his birth. So, a lot of things did not go smoothly in publishing this. I don't know, Toby, how you publish so many books. I don't know your relationship with your editors, but to me, that's the most insane thing, is to have a publisher and editor who has with your time. See, it isn't just their decisions, it's your time, and how you can craft something together. I just think that is something I never thought it would be that hard, just hard. So
Rachel, could I just chime in with my experience of publishing?
Yes,
I've got like 10 books published or something. It is hard, and editors can be difficult and they can be persnickety. And then it's a question of just how far are you from your vision when it finally gets published. And if you're close to your vision, you're happy. If it's too far away from your vision, you're not. And I think you should always hold on to your vision. And it's clear to me, Rachel, this book is really your vision of Haines, and it does a beautiful job of shaping his life in a way that allows the reader into that life so that he becomes understandable and humanized, and he's not this cantankerous bloke hanging out in Fairbanks being difficult and writing poetry that is not well known when it should be well known.
And again, I didn't live in Fairbanks with John Haines. I didn't have that kind of relationship. And the cards, let's be honest, I love getting a card from John Haines, and I like sending him a card to writing. I mean, this wasn't one-sided. And that was at a certain time in my life where he was that person where I could kind of ask these questions. I asked him about homelessness. I mean, we're talking about homelessness, not because of in the street or like that, but this homelessness, what is that? What is that neglect? The neglect of people. And I was just real fortunate. I was very, really fortunate, you know, to have that. And I think Lila, when Lila talks about living in that area, so living there, and Lila has been an advocate of poetry. I mean, since I've known her to do that. I just wonder how she would remember John Haines for the future. Like, what is it? Winter News. This Winter News, I think, was a curse for him. That book, written in 1966, it made him famous. But people, because other said they read Winter News and they came to Alaska. It's almost a cult. You know, they came to see him, and when he's dying and being read Winter News, I just find that almost I just can't. And I like Winter News. Don't get me wrong, but it's like there's so much more he struggled with to craft, to work. He worked hard as a writer. He worked hard. And it doesn't just happen, you know, it doesn't just happen. The other thing I'd like to say is I have been in correspondence with his stepdaughter, Annie Skilling, and she sent me some pictures of John Haines. They're really funny, some funny things, you know. But she said, I know him as my stepfather. I don't know him as a poet. I don't know him as all these other things. He was my father and a grandfather. And she sent me a picture of him rolling the baby stroller, you know, and how she helped him through high school with her work. So there are many John Haines out there. So I just add to it, you know. I add
Well,
to that.
maybe I think we're pretty much at the end of our
Okay.
time, and obviously we could have a whole series on John Haines. It sounds like, and I want to make sure Lila has a chance to weigh in a little bit. If there's anything else you'd like to say, Lila.
Thank you. I don't know why. It was a privilege for me to meet John Haines after being a fan of many years of all of his work, his poetry and essays. And I feel privileged to have known him. And I think Rachel did an amazing job expanding our understanding and knowledge about John. And I can't say enough good things about what she's done to leave this legacy
Thank
for
you.
future people to know the man in a more in-depth way than you get just reading his work.
Well,
Thank you, Rachel.
Thank you, Lila, and thank all of you for joining us in this brief discussion of John Haines. And as I said, clearly there could be hours more. I think we all hope it inspires you to read or reread his work, and also Rachel's memoir, May the Owl Call Again, a return to poet John Mead Haines, 1924 to 2011, published by Cirque Press. Available widely. John's books and Rachel's are in libraries. They're also available through interlibrary loan and bookstores. And please shop locally and order copies from your independent store when possible. So I think for Toby Whitcomb and Lila Vogt and Rachel Epstein, and also with gratitude for Trish Jenkins for organizing the Alaska Book Week events, I'm Heather Lindy. Thank you.
And thank you for including this book for Alaska Book Week. It really meant a lot to me that, you know, that I was included. So thank you, Lila. Thank you, Toby.
Fun. Thank you.
Thank you, Heather.
Thank you, Heather.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay.